Thank you, thank you. Oh, goody. We get to start right after lunch. So we've got a grand plan to keep us all attentive, and I hope that by stating what our very explicit goals are today, that you will be inspired and motivated to keep it up and keep taking notes. I think we're going to continue in the tradition started very helpfully by Major Garrett, which is to make this a do something panel. So think about this as do something part 2. I am Gloria Johnson-Cusack. I'm Executive Director of Leadership 18, which is an alliance of 20, not 18, CEOs that head the largest nonprofits that focus on human development. I'm happy to say that Father Larry Snyder is our past chairman and continues to be a member of our executive committee. And then we also have among our members 2 of the CEOs who are here today, Susan Dreyfus and Charlotte Haberaecker, who will introduce themselves as part of the panel. But it also might be important for you to know that included in that number are CEOs of the United Way Worldwide and the Salvation Army. All of them have signed on to this very ambitious and important effort that is being led by Father Larry. On this panel, our goal is going to be quite specific. It is going to be to inspire collaboration. I was lucky enough to have many conversations with many of you here in this room, and one of the biggest takeaways that I got was that it is important for you doers to have a good sense that this is more than an important learning session and an important networking session, but that you are able to come away with some actionable items. My hope for this panel will be that we will be able to just set enough context by these national CEOs to have them share some of their strategic priorities, and I have literally asked them to choose 1, maximum 2, to talk about. And then most importantly, for us to drive towards enabling you to make some decisions about whether you want to seriously considering partnering with them. So there's going to be, among a lot of other mixed up questions here, a very direct question which to these CEOs, if they're prepared for, which is to say, what's the ask that you would make of the people who are collected here today? You are all a bunch of passionate doers. I think we have heard enough during the previous few hours to know that our task is big, that the landscape is difficult, and yet we all show up every day and do the work that we do with spirit. And so I think it's with that intention that we want to embark on this panel discussion. We are going to start by inviting the CEOs who are with us here on this panel to introduce themselves. And for those who wish to, I have also invited them to share perhaps a book, movie, presentation, event that has happened in their lives recently that inspires them. Because I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that this is tough work that we're doing, and who can have too much inspiration? So that's how we're going to get started with this. And I think we're just going to start right with Susan and
I knew you'd do that.
go down. I can start down there, but you're good for it.
Susan, you're sitting at the front. I knew you were doing that.
But because you're good for it.
Thank you, dear. Thank you. It's great to be with you all. My name is Susan Dreyfus, and I'm proud to be the CEO of the National Alliance for Children and Families. I joined the Alliance in 2012 after serving as Secretary of the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, where I had responsibility for the state's economic assistance programs, the SNAP program, juvenile justice, child welfare, Medicaid program, the whole works. And came back to the Alliance as CEO in 2012. We're a national organization, and we work to build the capacities and the influence of America's nonprofit human serving sector. And you notice I said serving, not human services, because we are more than providers of programs and services under contract with government. We believe our sector stands to be transformational agents of change within society today. My inspiration, something I want to say that it jolted me more than inspired me, was watching 12 Years a Slave 2 weeks ago. And it just, I told my husband, I cannot watch movies like this ever again. It just jolted me. It just absolutely jolted me. And then at the same time I'm watching that, I'm reading and I'm attending all these various swarms, as you all are, where we're just confronted with the incredible disparities that continue to exist in America today, especially for children of color. Unconscionable. I came away from that movie saying, lest that we never forget, we should never forget the horrors. It wasn't all that long ago. But what struck me is I'd like to feel we were further along in our conversation as a society on the issues of race, and especially when I look at the incredible disparities across our systems for people of color.
David?
Good. I'm David Beckmann. I'm the president of Bread for the World. Bread for the World is a faith-based advocacy movement on hunger and poverty issues. We work on issues that affect hungry and poor people around the world, but also in this country. And we work in partnership with quite a few of the organizations who are here today, and also have a really remarkable grassroots network of faith-based advocates and churches, Catholic and Protestant churches of all stripes, that work with us to push Congress and the president to provide help and opportunity to hungry and poor people. Let me just say that over the last 3 years, I think the thing I'm most proud of is that over the last 3 years, we've worked with the Catholic Conference, the Catholic Charities, lots of Protestant churches of all stripes, to the Salvation Army's been important in trying to maintain a circle of protection around poor people in the budget debate. And basically, we've won. The House Republicans have 3 years in a row now passed budgets that would have cut $1.5 trillion from programs that go only to poor people over 10 years. And in the end, even with the recent cuts in SNAP and unemployment, the actual cuts in federal programs are about 3% of what the House has repeatedly and insistently called for. The book I've read recently, that I'm a Lutheran, but what I really like is a new book by his guy, Pope Francis. It's a short book called Joy of the Gospel. It's you can get it on Amazon, and it's really great. He talks about God's love for everybody, the joy that comes from that, but then also what comes from that is trying to transform our culture and our institutions, our economies, to reflect in some way the fact that God loves everybody.
Thank you.
That's free.
How are you going to follow that one up, Father Larry?
Okay, Larry Snyder, and I'm the president of Catholic Charities USA. And Catholic Charities it covers the United States and its territories, and does kind of the full spectrum of human services. We always say, though, that of our member agencies, if you've seen one Catholic Charities agency, you've seen one Catholic Charities agency, because they actually respond to the local needs of the community, and so that's how their programs are developed. And so the thing I think that as a group that's pretty impressive is that each year we serve almost 10 million people living in poverty in the United States. So when it comes to a conversation about poverty, we think we deserve to have a stake in that conversation. As far as movies or books, I can't get past the expectation that I'm supposed to say the Bible, right? It's, anything else just doesn't quite, and it is true, because I think for many of us who are faith-based, that's what keeps us going day in and day out. But David kind of stole a little of my thunder, because I thought, what I was going to say is the most inspiring thing for me right now is Pope Francis, in that what he's doing is he's making the Bible come alive to us. And he teaches by his actions. He gives us these incredible images that inspire us. And so every day, the first thing I get up is look at the internet and say, what has he said today? Because usually it's something that makes me feel like exactly, and you move on with the day. So that would be my inspiration as well.
Awesome. Rabbi.
I'm the president of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. It's an organization that is an umbrella for 125 Jewish community relations councils. Most communities have one, and 16 national organizations, many of which you've worked with or heard of. And what we have done over the last 6 or 7 years is try to take poverty itself and make it essential to Jewish life, essential to not essential to living Jewish life, but trying to end it as essential, and trying to make sure that in every community, in every city, that people actually take on this issue in their town. And we work very much with some of the organizations at this table. We work very closely with Catholic Charities. We have a yearly effort called Fighting Poverty with Faith, where we've worked on funding the housing trust, increasing SNAP benefits, getting politicians to use the word poverty in speeches, depending on the year. And this year we're working with Catholic Charities on the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty, because it's a war that just keeps going on and on and on. And as far as what has inspired me recently, and I was a little, some of the things that were said, I think I would have said too. Certainly 12 years a slave, but I think that the fact that we have taken, and many of us here on this panel and probably out there, taking the food stamp challenge, the idea of living on food stamps for what a food stamp recipient would live on for a week, doing it 3 times, and having seen thousands of Americans take it, 20 or 30 Congress members, it being part of one of our Fighting Poverty with Faiths, and understanding, even albeit a little bit, but existentially, what that one little taste of poverty can be. It's not much because you're going to get off of it in a week. It's inspired me to feel that everyone should feel it, everyone should do it, and if everyone does do it, I think we'll be more committed and more inspired to take on this issue on a grand scale.
Thank you. Charlotte.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Charlotte Haberaecker, President and CEO of Lutheran Services in America. We're a network of health and human service organizations that collectively serve about 1 in 50 Americans each year. Our members are on the ground every day fighting poverty and serving a very broad range of vulnerable low-income people, including children, youth, and families, seniors, people with disabilities, refugees, the homeless, and others, and providing just a very broad range of services from low-income housing to health care, mental health, senior services, and foster care and other services. One of the most influential presentations that I've seen recently was at a gathering of 70 of our CEOs recently. And it was inspiring because these are our folks that are on the ground every single day dealing with these issues and the rapid change in this environment. And what they were talking about was all the different ways that they're looking to help reshape the way services are provided and funded. And I'll just give you one short example of one of the areas that they were talking about. One of the programs that we have is we resettle refugees all over the country, and we help them find a home in a community, find a job, connect to really a new life for themselves. And one of the things that we found was that we were providing a lot of translation, interpretation services. And what we ended up realizing was what a talent pool we have here. What a talent pool of people who speak 70 different languages. Let's rethink this. And now we have a business. It's called a language bank. And we have a former Bosnian refugee who we resettled, who's running the program, 150 interpreters, and they're providing translation and interpretation services for government agencies and corporations. So I'm inspired by our CEOs and our members who are really taking on these challenges and trying to come up with new ways to fight poverty.
Nan?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nan Roman. I'm the president and CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. As our name indicates, we're an organization that's dedicated to solving the problem of homelessness, which we think is quite possible to do. It won't end poverty for everybody. It won't be the end of poverty, but it'll be a little step in the right direction. We do that through federal policy work, public education, and capacity building of organizations really focused on solutions. And I'm just delighted to be here with the group, and thanks to Catholic Charities for pulling us all together. Something that I've read that was very influential to me, Charlotte and I were just realized that we're both alumni of the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. There aren't that many of us in the area. Charlotte was smart. She went to business school. I got a master's degree in anthropology. So the book I read, and here I am, well, there's a connection in my own mind. The book I read is called Random Family by Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc. And it's a book about, she basically, the reason I brought up anthropology is, although she's not an anthropologist, she basically followed this set of people in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, for 11 years, as they essentially formed and reformed groups of people trying to create a family, or to create enough people together that they could afford a place to live, provide enough support to raise their kids, and have some stability in their lives, thus Random Family. But the thing that really struck me about the book, well, actually, it was never actually said in the book, but it was, but the author, something the author said later, which was, when asked for one thing that would have really made a difference in the lives of all these families. And I don't know if any of you have seen The Wire, but this book is a little bit like The Wire in that it just explains everything about poverty. You know it all. It's not new, but it just puts it into a story. She said the one thing she thought would have mattered most was if they had a Section 8 voucher, if they had a home, a place where they could stabilize and then move on to do the things they need to do. So that had a profound impact on me.
Thank you. And David.
Hi, I'm Dave Barringer. I'm the CEO for the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. I'm proud to represent about 150,000 Vincentians. We're a lay Catholic vocation. However, we work with people and organizations across all faiths and for the benefit of people in all faiths. And what's really interesting, I think, about the society is that we often work with people in poverty in their homes. Now, their home may be a living room, it may be a prison, it may be a hospital, it may be a shelter. But we're often right there creating a relationship with people as we deliver services and things like fuel assistance and whatever we can do to help them as they're in poverty. The big change that we're trying to make, and that you'll hear more about this afternoon from our president, is a systemic change initiative in trying to not help people less in poverty, but to move them out of poverty. And to do so, we're recognizing that we need to change three types of systems. One is the system that person in poverty is presently in. The second may be the macro systems, such as the government ability to help and influence those in poverty, as you heard about this morning. And the third is actually our own organization. Are we the organization that we need to be to accomplish the goals that we have to get more people out of poverty in the future? We already work quite a bit with members of the panel here at the local level, and look forward to the national relationships that we can have. The book and the movie, actually, that I want to talk about, it influenced me recently, was The Monuments Men. You may have seen this, and the point that the book and the movie were trying to make is that one of the greatest reflections of a culture is its art, and therefore its art is worth saving. As I saw the movie, I kept thinking, well, that's right. But I would rather think of a culture in terms of how it treats its people. And that, to me, was the big takeaway as well. The art and reflections of that culture is important. It's the culture itself in terms of our relationships with each other, how we protect and provide for each other, and enable them to have the opportunity to be to lead as full a life as they can. So that was what I took away from that.
Thank you. Thank you. And we hope that the takeaway that you all get is that we all need some, and we have to keep feeding our spirits to keep this work going. I'm going to start out by asking you, Father Larry, to comment about why now, why you thought it was important to bring all of us together to look at partnership. I know from the work that we do in advocacy, you probably were not surprised to hear the points of view that were shared by the policymakers in the earlier sessions, and to see that there are very different views of reality and very different views about the role of government. That might be enough to make us need to come together. But do you have any reflections in light of that conversation and moving forward?
Sure, and I think it goes back to my previous comment about the conversation here in Washington and how important it is for those of us who are actually providing the services to be a part of that conversation. This conversation about the war on poverty began already at the end of last year with certain headlines saying, war on poverty was lost. It's over. It's a dead concept. We should move on. And we felt we need to have an honest conversation about the war on poverty because, in fact, the war on poverty has tremendously improved the lives of millions of people from the 1960s, continuing to today. And we have to recognize that first and foremost, to recognize what it has accomplished, even as we talk about our 1964 solutions, the same solutions for 2014. We need an honest conversation about that. Ultimately, I would say there is a sacredness to the safety net in this country. All of us who do direct services form a part of that safety net. And I say it's sacred because, in fact, it helps millions of people to survive, who otherwise would not be able to, who would live lives that were substandard, without opportunity, with no dreams, no hope. So it's critically important. And having said that, I think we need to preserve the services and the help that we're giving to people who so desperately depend upon it. At the same time, I think we do need to change the paradigm from a safety net, because what does a net do? Basically, it catches you. And what we really want to focus on is not a system that's going to catch people, but a system that's going to give them an access out of poverty. So, as Representative Hudson said, maybe that's a bridge, but maybe it's a ladder, maybe it's a trampoline. We need some paradigm or image, though, that's going to take us to where people are going to end up, rather than simply holding them in a survival mode. I was alive and actually remember the 1960s. I think there are a few of us here that still do. And I remember that one of the greatest inventions at that time, or introductions, was carbon paper. It was the coolest thing, and it was so helpful to everybody. And yet, anybody still using carbon paper? It's, I think, but we're still doing the programs pretty much the way they were designed in '64. We just need to say, how can they be best effective in 2014? Well, we're not using carbon paper anymore. We have a lot of other things at our disposal that will enhance life. As I said this morning as well, we in the nonprofit world, we're the worker bees. We're the ones who are out there on the front lines. We're the ones who are helping people get on their feet. We're giving them the words of encouragement to keep going. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize that we as nonprofits have also been responsible for much of the innovation that has happened since 1964. And I think we can still be responsible for the innovation that needs to happen today. And it will come about through conversations and working together like the day we have today. When you look at the 10 partners who came together and signed this intention to this year to first of all make awareness of people of what the reality is, then to adopt innovations, and then to act locally. So educate, innovate, and act. When you look at us, put us all together, we serve over 180 million people every year in this country. That's an amazing thing that we should be proud of, but it should, like I say, it should also give us credibility to say, our voice needs to be in this as well. If we combine all of our voices, I think our advocacy is going to be far more effective. And I think if we combine our creativity and learn from each other, we will find the solutions that we need. Because my fear is nobody else is going to lead the way. It's us. So with that, that's to answer your question about why did we do this now?
All right, well, Rabbi, I'm going to come to you next because I know you are an impatient sort when it comes to getting at the how and innovating to come up with new solutions. So do you want to talk a little bit about what your reflections are on the discussions that have happened already, the political landscape we're working in now, and maybe talk about the unique how that you are pursuing?
Sure. Sure, of course. First of all, I made the mistake of telling you I like hard questions, and I can see you took that seriously.
Fool around.
Never again. What we've done is try very hard in these years is to inculcate community by community a deep belief that we have got to do something about poverty. And it doesn't happen really, I don't think, from here. And I don't think it's just about service, although I think service is extremely important, and the work that's done by most of the other organizations here really matters. But I also think it's about the whole idea that this is not acceptable. This is not something that can work. And so by bringing a community, a Jewish community, in partnership, in which we urge them to be in partners with their interfaith partners, with their racial partners, with everybody together to say, how are we going to solve it in Dallas, Texas? How are we going to solve poverty in Seattle? How are we going to solve poverty in Rochester, New York? And the fact of the matter is, it's only when we have that conversation, when we look at how people are suffering and feel, do a little bit, and I think this is a little bit of a religious calling, do a little walking of the walk, which I think the Food Stamp Challenge is part of. Do poverty seders, which we're going to do next week here all over the country, but particularly here in the Capitol. In fact, Jim McGovern, the Congress member who is here, will be one of the Congress members that will be there next week. It's by bringing it up in a way that everyone becomes aware and making it clear that no matter what we're talking about, and my organization doesn't just talk about poverty. We talk about the environment. We talk about immigration. We talk about politicians being involved in the world. We always talk about poverty. We always talk about what will happen with global climate change to the poor, because the poor are going to suffer most. We always talk about why immigration reform matters, because this is about poverty in this country, 12 to 14 million, depending on which statistics you use. I was speaking today to a Senate committee on prison reform for drug offenders early this morning, and I realized that too is about poverty. So we put poverty into every single thing we do, and by doing that, and by asking all of you to do that, whether you're doing service, but you can't limit it to service because you can only do so much by that. I mean, you can do a lot, but you can only do so much. It's by that whole idea, and those two Congress members today really helped us, because I think what they said to us is there's different ways. We have to work together to find and maybe even use different ways. But it's the idea that if we make poverty integral to what we do, to how we think, to how we look at the world, to how we walk the streets, we can make a difference in this country. And maybe we could just get rid of poverty. Maybe we could win that war instead of just have another one to fight.
Susan, I know that we spend a lot of time talking about doing things differently because we do the same thing the same way, we get the same outcome. You're thinking a lot about that, especially as a newer CEO in your role. Do you want to offer your reflections about all this?
Sure. Thanks, Gloria. There is a convergence that's happening. It's the best way I can describe it. And I'm going to speak for a minute as a former public sector leader, having had responsibility for a lot of the very programs that people have been talking about here today. And I think this convergence that I see happening is where there's an understanding now of what the cost is of the toxic stress of poverty, the constant and persistent stresses of poverty, and what that means to in a two-generational view in a family. I look at the advancing sciences, the advancing neurosciences, and what they're teaching us about the development of adult capabilities. I look at the adverse childhood experiences science, what that is telling us about the presence of adverse childhood experiences and what those mean, not only to a developing child, but to an adult, and their ability to have place and presence and success in this world. And then it's all starting to come around healthcare reform, isn't it? when everybody's starting to now realize that 5% of the population is driving 50% of the expenditures. And yet when we really study that, as we did in Washington State, as Governor Gregoire was leading healthcare reform in the nation, we realized it was this biopsychosocial intersection of health and the social determinants of health were the predominant factor in whether or not we were going to bend that cost curve of healthcare because of that reality. I say all this only because I think the only way we're going to elevate more people to have this conversation about poverty is if we start talking about it, I think, in a more diverse sort of way than I think the way we typically have talked about. I think we have to change our language, but I also think we have to understand that at the end of the day, when you're looking at this convergence of the sciences that I see, I just, as a former person in state government, I just saw it across these systems all coming together on us. These convergence of these issues, I think, is presenting us an incredible opportunity to have a different conversation about poverty. And the last thing I just want to add is this is our moment, I believe, as advocates, to look at this through a two-generational lens, to really look and understand this from a two-generational lens, and to get more people in America to understand what is happening in terms of children in our country, and what being raised in poverty means to a child in our country. And as I said before, the reality of what also sits in front of us, whether we're all comfortable with it or not, is you add the race piece to this conversation, and now all of a sudden the disproportionality of poverty, it just comes out. So I'm really fascinated watching the members in my network as they're doing incredible work in this regard, as they're taking this whole notion of the adverse childhood experiences science, what toxic stress does to a developing child, the two-generational view of that the Harvard Center for the Developing Child is giving us, and then the way people are starting to look at not just their programs, but moving from program thinking to social change thinking, and now starting to think that their role isn't just good program outcomes anymore. It's whether or not we really are going to reduce the number of people living in poverty, increase the number of people living safe and healthy lives, and putting more people onto pathways for education and employment success. And the longer I'm in this work, across all these systems and sectors and programs and services that we talk about, if we can't see ourselves and aren't seen as relevant in those four areas, then I think we'll just keep losing.
Mm-hmm. Nan, I want to come to you where we can drill down on an issue that I think all of us in this room know is crucial to alleviating poverty, and that's around housing stability. Can you talk about how you see the likelihood of their emerging political will around this issue in light of all of the things we've talked about on this panel and then earlier this morning, and then maybe share a little bit about the work that you're doing in that space?
Sure. Let me say first on the homelessness side that homelessness has, in terms of the political environment, has always been a pretty bipartisan issue. But recently, I think it's also been a strong bipartisan issue because it's really been framed as a problem that can be solved, not that we're just managing it or building a system that's going to manage it, but that we're trying to end it. And then we've had a lot of data and research, and this sort of to Father Larry's point, and there's been a constant change in the approaches and improvement in the approaches, and that seems to have also been very attractive to Congress, which has been fairly generous relative to other things with homeless assistance. So I had an interesting experience over the past couple of years because I was a member of a housing commission that was set up by the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with that group, but that's a kind of a think tank here in DC that takes on really big problems like the budget and housing. Immigration is one they're working on now. And they put together these bipartisan commissions to try to come to some solutions in a bipartisan, obviously, fashion. So I was on the housing one. It was chaired by Senator Kit Bond and former Senator Mel Martinez, former HUD Secretary, on the Republican side, and George Mitchell and former Housing Secretary Henry Cisneros on the Democrat side. And there were 20 of us, half Democrats and half Republicans. So we made recommendations in a variety of areas, but one thing that was pretty interesting. So I'll just tell you, I guess, my observations of it in terms of bipartisanship and information, and kind of sort of a surprising result. At the very beginning of it, we had a set of 4 or 5 principles, and one of them was that we needed to adjust the federal priorities between home ownership and affordable rental housing. I thought that was surprising at the outset of the discussion, but there were a lot of people on the commission, I will say, who basically were on the commission, I think, to hold on to the home ownership side of things and the mortgage interest deduction. And also we said in a principle that the major purpose of federal housing assistance should be to help people most in need. Now, one of the things we saw when we were on the commission from the data was that if you look at how much gets spent on housing, 180 billion gets spent on home ownership and 40 billion gets spent on affordable rental. So that is clearly not at the moment the priority. What I learned in going through the process with people, and we ended up making a recommendation actually that everybody under 30% of AMI, so everyone who's poor, should receive rental assistance. And that was a bit of a shock to me that I was obviously in favor of that, but I didn't think we'd get the other half of the task force commission on that. But these were my observations. First, that there were a lot of people there, all housing professionals and all caring people, who had no idea that there are people, literally, no idea that there are people in this country living on $10,000 or $15,000 a year. They just could not believe that was the case. They denied it. So there are a lot of people, even in our own sectors, who don't really know what the situation is. The second thing is when they found that out, they felt absolutely there was not any argument that we needed to do more. The third thing was that it was the Republicans who really led that. It was not the Democrats. But the Republicans were more focused, as I think came out this morning, on being more efficient. And the Democrats were more focused on just wanting more money. So we just need to do more, and the Republicans felt we needed to do smarter. When it came to but everybody agreed we needed to do more. And further, I didn't think we'd be able to go all the way, so I proposed some lesser things, but they wanted to go all the way. The Republicans wanted to go all the way. We did go all the way, so everybody who was poor, and there's some other stuff in there too. The rub came when it came to paying, because when it came to paying, the vested interests started to get involved. But I can't go through all the details of it, but at the end of the day, we did do it. It was a $33 billion recommendation we made on housing. That's, almost the size of the current HUD budget. And we had to pay for it, and we did pay for it. And we paid for it in the context of, there's a very tortuously worded statement about how we paid for it. But basically, if there's tax reform, shifting money from the mortgage interest deduction. So a few interesting experiences on the bipartisan side around housing.
A lot of political dynamics in play there, clearly. David, you want to talk a little bit about your observations about the way forward, especially since I know a lot of the work that you do with Bread for the World is in the advocacy space.
Right.
And you're wanting to be ambitious about setting ambitious goals while you're being bipartisan. So what's your vision for that?
You got it. I think we can be ambitious, and I think we need to be political. At Bread for the World, we're struck that the world as a whole is making dramatic progress against hunger and poverty. The World Bank estimates that the number of people in the world in extreme poverty has been cut in half since 1990. And it's happened in all different kinds of countries. Countries as different as Bangladesh and Brazil and Great Britain. Also in this country, we have experience of making real progress against poverty. During the Clinton years, we cut the poverty rate by about a third. The big success was the 60s and early 70s. Now, during that time, we had a sustained period of economic growth, so people could get jobs. That's really important. And then President Johnson launched the War on Poverty. It continued in the Nixon years. It was really in the Nixon years. The Nixon administration led the establishment of the WIC program, the food stamp program. So at that period of time, the whole nation was enough focused on poverty so that we had leadership from the federal government. The fact that the world has made real progress against poverty during the period that had been framed, in a sense, by the International Millennium Development Goals is leading the international community and the nations of the world toward a consensus. And I think that, that the nations of the world will agree next year to try to end extreme poverty and hunger by the year 2030. And this time around, they're setting goals not just for Africa, for Tanzania, but also for all countries. So presumably the new global goals will also apply to the United States. President Obama favors that. And so I think we have a good chance that the United States would probably be the main holdout in any attempt by the rest of the world to impose standards on us. But these new goals will be a shared agreement among the nations and peoples of the world to try to end extreme poverty and hunger by 2030. It seems to me if we're thinking that, I think Bangladesh can do that, and I think so can the USA. Another date that I think is really important is 2017, because in 2017, we'll have a new president, and there's a good chance that he or she will say, it is time for our country to get serious about hunger and poverty. Might be different language, but that idea, there's a good chance. We'll have open primaries in the presidential election on both the Republican and the Democratic side. And when that happens, it doesn't happen very often, there's a real process of the nation rejigging its priorities as different candidates put forward different ideas in the primaries. So when we get to January 2017, our country will have different priorities. And we need to get our country as a nation with federal leadership to get serious about hunger and poverty. It's not that the government can do it all. I certainly don't believe that. But 1,000 points of light, 2,000, 3,000 points of light has not done it. What we need is the federal government, that means the president and the Congress, to set a framework, to establish a priority. And then in that context, state governments, charitable networks, businesses, poor people themselves all of us can do our part to, in fact, end poverty, end hunger. So what I want out of this meeting, I think the next step, we made these 3 commitments, Larry, but I think the next step might be, certainly for our powerful institutions, these are powerful institutions in this room, that a number of our institutions could wrap ourselves around the 2030 and the 2017 goals, that we want to end poverty by 2030, that we want to get our country to make it a priority by 2017. And just maybe the whole coalition could agree in some way on those goals, and then follow up with an action plan to get to the American public, to get to our supporters, to get to politicians, so that we change the direction of the nation and get to the end of poverty.
Well, there's an aspiration worth thinking about. David, all the way down there, tell us how you're thinking about this. I know a lot of your work is, and advocacy especially, is shifting into the state space and also federal. How are you thinking about the how in the context of everything we've discussed here?
You know, as I've gotten this far through the day, I don't know whether to be excited or just more frustrated. it's hard for me to imagine a family out there that's poor to tell them they've got to wait till 2017 for us to get our act together. I think, and I know that's not what you meant, David. There's a lot that we can do now, and our society of St. Vincent de Paul is thinking a lot about advocacy, and we've taken some steps both at the national level and now at the local level. But we're not going to wait to have somebody else try to solve the problem if there's something that we can and should be doing ourselves. What I've heard this morning and what I've heard well before today is that sometimes we're focused on the wrong goals. I'd like us to be thinking less about the minimum wage and more about career training so that no one has to settle for a minimum wage job. I think there's a lot to do with immigration reform. We're at very differing goals right now. We ship high-trained jobs overseas, and we bring in more poor people who need more benefits. That's completely backwards. We have enough food, I think, or we're getting close enough to having enough food in this country, but we don't have enough education about nutrition. We probably have people who may earn enough money, but they make bad financial decisions, and they need more help with financial literacy. One of the things that we're looking at with the Vincentian family is the payday lending situation. Why is that so tough? Because it's owned by the biggest banks in the country. So there are those systemic issues that are before us. And I think, I was reminded of this listening to the congressman this morning. We can wrap our arms around some of the issues, but until we can figure out what our goals really are, we're not going to get very far. We've thrown over this 50 years of the war on poverty, billions of dollars at it. When this group first came together, I kept hearing the same story. We're doing more and more, sometimes with less and less, but the line for help never gets any shorter. So how can we expect that if we continue to do even more again, that it's going to make any more of a difference? We've got to change everything. Now, when I say that, I don't want to stop giving that immediate assistance for food and fuel and other things to families. It's hard to learn something if you're hungry. But let's get them into classes. Let's have more of a caseworker approach, as we heard about this morning. And let's stop thinking in terms of, can we create one big safety net, as Father Larry said, one big Band-Aid? Except for a few cases of extremely bad choices on individuals' parts or a disaster, a lot of families get into poverty generationally. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect that they're going to get out of poverty overnight. It's going to take some time. As we were talking this morning, kids that go through the day of a life of a family in poverty, going from service to service, spending all their time just trying to scrape together the resources for the day, that becomes normal after a while. We need to find ways to break normal and give them goals, give them a way out, whether it's education, whether it's examples and mentoring, many things that we probably haven't even thought of yet. But as I said, it's very frustrating, but I do have hope, because I know if enough good people come to the table, we can probably come up with some better answers. Two groups today that I don't think are at the table here, which should be in our future meetings. One is the private business sector, who are the only ones really that could be creating more jobs. And secondly, we don't, that I know of, have people in poverty in this room. That's difficult to get people to a setting like this because, again, they're trying to get the resources they need to get through the day, get through the week. But that closeness to the customer, if you will, is extremely important. When I talk to people in poverty, they don't say, please create a government program. They say, help me get a job. They don't say, please fix the Social Security program or something. They say, help me feed my kids today. Okay. We need to be focused on those things for the immediate effect, while at the same time being, again, as efficient as possible, not just with government, but among the players in this room and our peers, to put our money and our talent to better use. One of the things that's always frustrated me, and I'll end on this, is we have way too many nonprofits in this room. Not in this room, but in this country. Maybe in this room. Every time I turn around, there's another group that thinks they're doing the same work that my group is doing or the work of one of the other groups here. So what, in effect, we're doing is we're creating more nonprofit jobs. Okay, now that might be good, but do we really need for every new nonprofit a new bookkeeper, a new program manager, a new CEO for that matter. While a lot of that money could be consolidated through joint activities and efficiency, fewer jobs in our sector to create more jobs in the rest of the world. And I think that it's very hard to advocate to government to say, be more efficient, put more money in our direction until we can admit and make changes ourselves in our systems to say, maybe there's too many nonprofits out there. Let's take a look not just at partnering, but at consolidating, putting our talent and our money to better use with fewer people as an infrastructure, and therefore more resources available for our real work.
Those are all important points, and it strikes me that certainly in the advocacy work that we do at Leadership 18, we find that those policymakers are really happy to hear us acknowledge some of the realities that you just talked about, because it helps convey that we don't have our heads in the sand, we're not in denial, and that we are inclined towards being innovative and solving the problems that we all care a lot about. Okay, I'm going to take a hard pivot towards being really prescriptive and tactical, and invite all of our friends who might not have their notepads out or their, whether it's digital or on paper, to pull them out, because I'm going to invite each of you to just jump in and make your asks. Sort of think about this as sort of the opportunity where you've got true believers with limited resources, but who have very much shared aspirations and often shared goals. And they're sitting here wondering, what thing are you working on, national CEOs, that would be helpful for us to know, so that we can decide if there's some strategic interest, ability, timing that aligns with our organization and organizations and communities' needs, so that by the time we leave this room, I know that I need to place a call to you or to someone in your organization to say, hey, how can I help, or how can you help me be more effective? So I know it must be kind of hard, like having somebody force you to ask for things, but we are all in a world where, we shouldn't be self-conscious about it, and we know we need those partnerships. So whoever wants to jump in, please do two things. Talk about one specific thing that you're working on, identify what the need for partnership is, and be really specific about what that ask might be. Okay, you want to go first?
I'll start, sure, because she tipped me off earlier anyway. One thing that we're spending our time on in the next year is changing our culture from the top-down leadership, going to the grassroots, in our case, parish level, of being the organization that we need to be to reach the goals that we want to reach. That's not easy to do when you've got a volunteer network spread across 4,000 communities and people who are used to doing things the same way for decades. So we're giving us, weeks to get it done. My specific ask for each of us, in order to make, as you say, a hard pivot, is I would challenge each of us to take 25% of our budget and 50% of our management attention on working with at least one other agency in town to see if you can combine, strengthen, and be more efficient together or on your own, even with the insane goal of merging or knocking out a competitor, if you will, to be more efficient one community at a time. You can't do this in incremental steps. You've got to really take the time and money available to pull it out and really spend that attention on it. That would be my challenge.
Wow, that's a great way to start. Is that specific enough for you? All right, who else?
So what Bread for the World is trying to do is end poverty by 2030. And toward that end, make hunger and poverty a priority for the United States by 2017. We haven't had a president since Lyndon Johnson who considered poverty one of his top 5 priorities. So why are we surprised that we haven't made dramatic progress against poverty over these years? So that's what we've got to change. And what I would invite the people and organizations in the room to do is to embrace those goals. To think about, okay, if it's possible to end poverty or something like that by 2030, to change national priorities by 2017, what does Catholic Charities need to do to play its part? And I can suggest some specific things, but I think we can all think those through. It might be, to be provocative, it might be that organizations would invite their supporters and their clients to pick a candidate this year. Not, we don't choose the candidate. They should pick a candidate who cares about poverty and give that person some time and money and their vote. That would be a huge change. And then I think we as a coalition, I don't think we can get that far out, but as a coalition, we ought to set a goal to end poverty, and when are we going to get our government serious about it?
So can I go? Go. Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit disruptive here. That's kind of my nature. We've got to change the conversation. We have got to change our language. We talk about people who have hopes, dreams, aspirations, and we talk about them as poor people. And our language, I think, is a very real issue. And I think we all have to confront that individually and collectively. At the Alliance for Children and Families, we just did a pretty disruptive thing. We just merged with the United Neighborhood Centers of America. Sterling Spurn used to be at the Kellogg Foundation. He has a quote that I just absolutely love, and it's going to get you to what I'm asking. And he says in his quote, I just think it's wonderful, for change to be durable, I love that term, durable. For change to be durable, the fuel is internal and organic, and change comes from the inside out. When I was child welfare director in Wisconsin years ago, I remember being out in the field with my staff. Because you can't do this work. We can't be policy leaders. We can't be talking about our vision for the world if we don't have a head and a heart for the work. And these policymakers who were here today, clearly it's a situation where we've got to get people out in the work, talking with the very families and the people we're talking about. But I remember being out in the field with my staff on a family that was involved in the child welfare system and sitting on the couch, family living in absolute poverty. And there I sat on the couch with another mother who wanted the same things for her children as I wanted for my own. But yet that is not how we see the people that we are here today talking about and for, and the authenticity of their engagement. Well, we realize it's at the Alliance for Children and Families that change does come from the inside out. And so our merge with the United Neighborhood Centers of America has launched a new national center, and I ask you all to own this with us. It's a national center on engagement and neighborhood building. It is to amplify the place and presence of what Jane Addams knew well, walking the streets of Chicago at Hull House, about the authenticity of engagement, whether that's in our policy or it's in our practice, regardless of how we intersect in people's lives. So my ask would be, one, we need to take a strengths-based language approach to this work. Personally, I'll tell you, as a former policy leader in state government, we're not going to get there talking about ending poverty. I'm sorry, I don't think we are. I think we have to start talking about the human capital assets of this country, and we've got to talk about health and education and what America needs to be prosperous. And then I think we've got to really make sure we are elevating the place and presence of the very people we are talking about in terms of their stories. So I'd like to ask everybody, as we're trying to change the consciousness of America, ready for 2016 and ready for January 2017, that every one of us are going to make sure that there's not a single member of Congress, a single member of a state legislature, a single governor who is not spending time in the homes, in the places where the people who are living in poverty are living and working and aspiring in their daily lives. So I think we've got to, we can't tinker around the edges of this thing. I think we've got to ask ourselves, it hasn't worked so far. I think we've got to change, we've got to do something a bit more bold. And I think a reframing of how we're talking about this is critical.
Can you restate Sterl's quote again about
For change to be
durability?
durable, the fuel is internal and organic, and change comes from the inside out. And I think that is pretty
Charlotte?
powerful.
Thank you so much.
And along those lines, I find it interesting because I've changed my language in the last year and a half I've been in this position. It used to be we serve, right? We love and serve our neighbor. And we talk now about we walk alongside of people. It's not that we're necessarily helping out others less fortunate than ourselves, but recognizing our humanity with each other and working neighbor to neighbor. And so it is a reframing of that. As I've gone around the country, Gloria, I find an enormous interest in this initiative. I find that people are always asking me, what are you doing together? These wonderful organizations, well, what is your action plan? Where are you going? So I actually do think this is a unique moment in time where we have an opportunity to make a difference. And 180 million people that collectively we walk alongside of is a huge number. We have a strong and credible voice, and we need to be raising that. I think convening more bipartisan collaboration such as today is a wonderful idea. I think we should advocate together and we should act together.
Thank you. Who else? Jump in.
Do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
I think we're all sort of singing from the same pew. I mean, we live in different churches, but the same pew. It's interesting. I'm studying, believe it or not, Mark and Matthew. I'm in Matthew. I've just finished Mark with another rabbi. We do crazy stuff. And what I've learned is that in the Christian religion, nothing could be more important than confronting poverty, than trying to stop it. It's certainly the most used word in the Jewish Bible, and it's also very, very important. I know in the Quran, and I think probably in every tradition. And I think, we're sitting here. I have no idea how many of you. I know there's a priest and a preacher and a rabbi. Probably the rest of you are too up here. I think I don't think we have a national will, and I think to have a national will, I personally think we have to get out of our own organizations and what we do with the idea that there's something more to be done. And when you suggested the part of the budget I think part of our budget, meaning our time, our money, going back to our organizations and our community, should be bringing God into this picture. Because if we're going to change the national will and do stuff by 2017 or 2030, we're going to need to bring something bigger right now than we have. And I think that it's so clear that we have to be able to talk about the poor. We have to be able to do that. So I would urge each one of us, ourselves included, to create a national organizational world that talks about this and works on bringing the entire religious world into this. But in each of your communities, take about 10% of your time and figuring out 10% of your budget. How can you bring the different religious traditions together to say so clearly and unambiguously, this is not okay? God would not want it. God wants us to work together because God wants us to stop poverty. That's pretty clear. So I'm asking each of us to go from the deepest part of ourselves, that part that's beyond ourselves, really, and to create an America that's going to stand up and say it's enough. God would not want this to go on. That's my hope. My hope is that we'll all go a little bit out of our shells, out of our normative ways of doing things, because we haven't just been as successful as I would like, and we're all good people. So I think there's one more thing to go, and I would urge us to go there.
So I'll also take the speaker's prerogative and throw out a challenge to all of us, and then I'm going to turn it back to Father Larry in case you have any closing remarks to the panel. We have about 3 minutes left. And just say that I've got about 20 years of experience working in government and political work and now in the philanthropic space. And I think it would be remiss for me if I did not call out the need for all of us as national leaders and leaders in our community to be very intentional about our diversity practices. It is too often the case that I am the only person of color in the room. It is too often the case, and that holds true when I'm in board meetings, it holds true when I'm working with senior level staff, it holds true when there are community-based meetings and organizing going on. You can pretty much count on one's ability to know who the staff members are in the philanthropic space because they are going to be the folks who are not of color. And to get to the point that I think has been said many times in different ways on this panel, in order for there to be authentic engagement in our communities, in order for us to have credibility when we are mobilizing or whether we are advocating or whether we are raising money, it is important that there be an informed perspective. And that informed perspective really only comes when there is true diversity of perspectives in the decision-making as well as in the execution. And so my ask of you would be to write down have we re-examined our diversity practices lately? Not last year, not 2 years ago, not a decade ago. And to think about that in terms of socioeconomic diversity, as well as ethnic diversity, as well as age diversity, as well as every other kind of diversity we could think about, faith and otherwise, because it's not just the nice thing to do or the moral thing to do or the godly thing to do, it's the strategic way to get the work done. And I think we have learned through the years, those of us who study history, that we will not get it right unless we have progress in this area. So with that, I will turn it over to Father Larry and see if there's any more that you'd like to share.
I think one of the things that I'm going to take away from this conversation is something that Susan said about the moving from program thinking to social change thinking. And are we ready to do that as program providers? Because it's not easy. It really means a whole different context in which we see our work. And I see one aspect of that is the conversation that we've had about the difference between outputs and outcomes. And very simply, those of you who run shelters, you know the outputs. You know how many people were in your beds last year, and something you should be very proud of. But if that's the goal, then we'll just keep building more shelters. But if our goal is to really get people out of shelter and into their own homes or into some kind of stable housing, then how do we measure that? Can you tell me, of those people who were in your shelter beds last year, how many actually got into some kind of independent, stable living situation? And I think if our goal is that, we may very well design the programs differently. It's not an easy thing for us to do. But I guess that would be the takeaway that I would have, is that program thinking is good. It helps, millions of people, but how many more are getting lost because we're not doing social change thinking? So that would be my takeaway. Thanks.
I'd like to thank each and every one of our CEOs. They are very busy people doing important things. We pushed them a lot in organizing this to be thoughtful and make sure that there was time for all of them to share their very unique perspectives. And I thank you especially for the challenging asks. And now, do your homework. Figure out how you can partner with these organizations and amongst yourselves to have more impact. Thank you very much.